Afternoon. I think we have a quorum, but if not, we will. We're not voting on anything in the next, well, except for the minutes in a few minutes. I'm Charlie Zelli, Chair of the Corridor Management Committee for the Blue Line. Welcome. Just a couple of housekeeping pieces here before we get started. The mics are live, and this is publicly streamed, so just keep that in mind. And if you're looking for any of the handouts, or if you're tuning in for the public, just know that all the handouts, the information will be on the project website, which is bluelineext.org. That's just one word, bluelineext.org. And if there are members of the public listening in that'd like to submit any comments for CMC consideration, please email Nkongo Cigolo, who is, I'm sitting right in front of me. I'll spell that, Nkongo.Cigolo at metrotransit.org. And if you do that before the 21st, we'll make sure that it's part of the minutes and part of the record. So before we get going, maybe we could just go around the table and introduce ourselves. And I will look to my left, because last time I looked to my right, but I'll go this way.
Reva Chambliss, Metropolitan Council, District 2.
Robert Williger, Metropolitan Council, District 7.
Jim Adams, Crystal Mayor.
Nick Thompson, Metro Transit.
Mike Barnes, MnDOT District Engineer.
Nkongo, Cigolo.
Chris Beckwith with the project office.
Cal Simmons, project staff.
Ricardo Perez, Blue Line Coalition.
Jeff Landy, District 1, Hennepin County.
Jason Greenberg with the Community Advisory Committee.
Irene Fernando, Hennepin County Commissioner, District 2, and Rail Chair.
Thank you. And, oh, we're just joined by...
Councilmember Jillian Rosenquist, City of Golden Valley.
Welcome. Well, welcome, everybody, and thanks for giving your time today. Before we totally get into the agenda items, I'm going to call on Chris Beckwith to maybe make a few introductions.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So first, I want to reintroduce Nkongo Cigolo, right next to me. And he joins the team as the Manager of Public Involvement. He has nearly 20 years of engagement experience, both in Minnesota and internationally. And most recently, he worked as the outreach coordinator for the Green Line extension, and then before that, for the Green Line, the original Green Line. We were trying to figure out who has been here longer, because I told Nkongo, you've been here as long as I can remember, and I've been doing this for 14 years back to Central Corridor. He's been here longer than I have, and I think pretty close to when Dan started. So these are some of the original folks that have been delivering these projects in the region. So we're really thrilled to have Nkongo joining our team. He's going to present to you today. He gets no grace period. He gets to jump right in. So welcome, Nkongo.
Thank you.
I have two other staff. Zhang is right behind me here, and she's our principal administrative specialist. You may have seen some emails coming from her already, and you'll see many more. She has an extensive background in customer support services and comes to us from Metro Transit in customer relations. So she's been with Metro Transit for a number of years, and we're excited to have her join us at the Blue Line. And then lastly, Zhang, back here as well. She is our agreement specialist, comes to us from the West Coast with direct experience in this work, also experience in right-of-way and a bunch of other things that we are doing in the project office, so kind of has that broad experience that she's bringing in, and an MBA focused on project management. So she will be the agreement specialist. We'll be working with a lot of the city and county staff going forward as we're executing agreements.
Great. Thank you. Welcome, Nkongo. And Jer, Annie, we're in good hands with lots of experience. Great, thank you for that. And today we've got a pretty full agenda. We're going to see a kind of a review of the public engagement processes. We're going to get a staff recommendation on project scope to include in the environmental analysis. And then finally, and not least importantly, a kind of update on our anti-displacement update when I just see Terrence come in. So we have a lot of good information ahead. I should also mention that there's a meeting in this room at 3 o'clock, tightly scheduled transit folks that they are. So I'm going to ask that when we finish, we're all going to have to move our conversations out of the lobby. Just give you a little heads up on that. So as we get into it, on to approving the notes from the last meeting. Thank you, Commissioner Fernando, who chaired the meeting, and we were in good hands. And now I give an opportunity for anyone to give any edits. Hello, Councilmember Ellison, welcome. And if there's any additions, corrections, speak now. Otherwise, we can have an approval of the minutes.
I move approval.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. On to the Community and Business Advisory Committee report, and I see Jason Greenberg is here. So Jason.
Yeah, so we had an interim meeting, so there are new people that are still coming to the group from different communities as well as organizations. So while we were waiting for those all to be officially appointed, we had an interim meeting, joint meeting of the CAC and the BAC, covering much of the material and discussing the material that is being presented today. And actually, a lot of new members, so we're kind of in the next phase, as we all are here. They're kind of new, this is the new group of the CAC and the BAC. So with that, just new questions, new people. So a lot of healthy discussion throughout our meeting with people that aren't as experienced, that haven't been involved in as many meetings. So as we went through, just a lot of clarification around what's going on with anti-displacement, what does that mean to the project, and things like that. Sort of almost like a level set, because for some of us, we're well into the project and have been involved all along, but for a lot of people, it's now new. And so there was a lot of great energy, to be honest, in the call. And a lot of great questions from that. So that was pretty much it. We're looking forward to starting again in November with our official CAC and BAC meetings separately.
Thank you, Jason. And thanks for your chairing and staying with this. And it's good to have new members getting an outside perspective, looking at it with a fresh eyes during this important phase. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep.
Any questions for Jason from any of the committee members? Okay, so thanks. We are now going to get a little bit more of a summary of our outreach and public engagement. And I think Chris and Nkongo are going to take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll kick us off and then head it off to Nkongo. The first 3 slides I'll present are just a recap of what we talked about at our last CMC. So this shows kind of our steps and where we are in the process, that we had a final environmental impact statement from the previous phase of the project. We will then move into a supplemental draft, SDEIS, environmental impact statement, and followed by a supplemental final EIS. And over on the right side is one of my it's one of my favorite visuals we've been using at public meetings. We put this on a big poster, and it's got the UR here right at the top. It outlines this very clearly in 4 steps. Right now, we're just selecting the design options to move into the draft environmental document. So that's the phase we're at today, and we're going to explain to you, walk through what the design options are that we propose moving into the environmental document, and then there'll be a comment period that'll start next week. So if all looks good with that, then the next step would be moving into preparing the draft environmental document. So I just wanted to reframe that for you. Again, this is a recap of the September CMC. We continued outreach and engagement efforts. We've had several meetings, lots of meetings that Nkongo can report on today. We will, as we told you, we will recommend the environmental scope at this CMC, so we're ready to do that today. We had, for Target Field Station to West Broadway, there was 4 to 5 options, and we proposed to narrow those down to 2 options today for further study. At the 21st Avenue versus West Broadway, there was 4 options there, and we wanted to propose to narrow those down to 2 options as well. And really, the primary reason for doing this is it's better for us to eliminate options that are not feasible or that are not going to progress, and just focus on the feasible options that we can really explore, dig into, so that the folks that are reading this document, that is a consumable document to them, it doesn't have A, B, C, D, E, F, all those options that you're trying to figure out in that document itself. It's better for us to move down to feasible options in the study. So we will also talk to you about the notice that will be published in the Environmental Quality Board, the EQB monitor, and that the 20-day comment period would be starting next week. So here's just a recap. This is a slide from our last CMC, just shows the questions that we asked in the September meetings. And then Nkongo, I'll hand it to Nkongo, who is going to tell you a little bit about what we heard.
Thank you, Chris. So the questions from the previous slide helped us guide the conversations as we advanced through September engagement activities. We held 3 in-person workshops, 2 virtual meetings, and we checked in with community and business stakeholders. We set up an interactive map on the website, and we were able to gather input from the website on the maps that were posted. We also gathered surveys, online surveys, and feedback from online surveys and from input from personal interactions with stakeholders. I wanted to point out the image to the top right of the slide. That's a changeable message sign. It's one innovative means of communication that we've used in September to reach out to the communities and providing that ability to advertise using various means in addition to what our standard means have been. That has really been very helpful, and would like to thank Hennepin County. Hennepin County helped us set that up, and would like to continue using that going forward. So really from the Target Field station to West Broadway route options that were under evaluation, we've got the Lyndale Avenue option in purple, and then we got 2 I-94 options. We've got the West I-94 and the East I-94. So as it comes to the Target Field station to West Broadway route, some of the responses that were received as part of the interactions that we've had with the community, it appears that the East I-94 was the most favored option, and second to that was the Lyndale Avenue option. And the reasoning behind that, as the community brought those forward, station location and access, property impacts, development opportunities, safety, and transit connections. Those were the main themes that we heard from the community. So common themes, really, the community would really want us to pay attention to the fabric of these communities that the alignment is going through, and would like to consider access, and especially access to the Twin Cities International School. They have very limited street access, and that was a key component of the comments that were received as we reached out to various stakeholders. In addition, community would like for the project office to evaluate other options and bring solutions to the table. Walkability was one big item. To put a station within walking distance, and also visibility to enhance safety. For the 21st Avenue, for the 21st Avenue and West Broadway options, there are 4 options that were being evaluated throughout the engagement process. There's option A, which would have LRT and vehicular traffic on West Broadway. Option B, which would have LRT on West Broadway and split vehicular traffic between Broadway and 21st Avenue. And then option C, which would have LRT split between 21st Avenue and West Broadway, and also have vehicular traffic split between West Broadway and 21st Avenue. Option D would have LRT just on 21st Avenue and vehicular traffic remaining on West Broadway. So really what we've heard from the community as they evaluated those four options, that option A, maintaining both LRT and vehicular traffic on West Broadway was favored. And second to that was option D, which would maintain LRT traffic on 21st Avenue and vehicular traffic on West Broadway. So really, the reasoning behind that, station location, again, common themes, resurfacing, development opportunities, property impacts, and then transit connection and safety, other pieces that we heard from the community. Now, the common themes across West Broadway and 21st Avenue, local businesses supporting local businesses, parking and alley improvements, and considering safety, and again, connection and transit and station location. So the question about what is important in the evaluation of the routes, what we heard from the community is betterments and increasing green space, environmental justice, just to list a few, and then reduction to property impacts, investing in the corridor, maximizing ridership. The list is long, but at least just to name a few, those are the common things that we've heard from the community as we engage the community through this process. Community wanted us to evaluate additional options and solutions for local bus service, continuing to improve pedestrian facilities, considering additional stations, and maintaining that fabric, that community fabric, which was a key element that we heard from the community. We've set up October meetings as we continue to engage the community on various route options. We've got a meeting in each city along the alignment. We've also set up 2 virtual meetings. These meetings have already been advertised or posted on our website, and we've reached out to our community engagement partners so that they could help us put the word out so we could get a good turnout for these meetings. And I'll turn over to Chris.
Thank you, Nkongo. And I am just going to go through another lens that we used in our outreach process, which is evaluation criteria. The options that Nkongo just presented were reviewed across a set of evaluation criteria. This included a narrative description and then kind of a sliding scale to help visualize. And the purpose of that was to generate discussion at the open houses to see if if we're capturing everything, if we're getting the comments in there, and then also to help determine which options would be eliminated. So it wasn't necessarily to determine which was the best option, it was just to determine which ones we would eliminate and not study any further. These are the criteria, the 5 criteria from right-of-way, transit effectiveness, land use, operational considerations, and compliance with street objectives. And you see some sub-bullets there of what encompasses that category. And then I will first present the target field to West Broadway matrix. This is what it looks like. So we've got the 3 options that showed on the map, the Lyndale, the West 94 option, and the East 94 option. I'm going to focus on the center one that we are proposing to drop, the West I-94 option, as Nkongo just presented. That was the least preferred from those that were voting through the website and through some of the handwritten notes we received from our outreach meetings. So that one was eliminated, and you can see kind of some of the scoring here. It did have a few more right-of-way impacts. It's really hard to cite a station on that on that side. I'm going to flip back here. It's the green line shown on here. So difficult to site a station in there, and as far as compliance with street objectives, it really is kind of off the street network. So that was not preferred in the outreach, and it also didn't, in our quick and dirty scoring here, it did not float to the top. So we'll be proposing to eliminate that one. Moving over to the 21st versus West Broadway options, as Nkongo mentioned, it's option A and option D we propose to move forward. Option B and option C, those are the options that split the traffic, and option C also splits the light rail. And that really just was not received favorably in our outreach. It was described as challenging if light rail is going one way on one street and another way on the other. Wayfinding, how do you know which platform to be on? The costs in constructing that infrastructure in two different locations. It just was not favored by the businesses or the community. So we would propose, even though those are innovative ideas to look at a different approach here, we'll be proposing to drop those two as well. That would leave option A, which is everything on West Broadway, or option D, which is putting the light rail on 21st and then leaving vehicular traffic on West Broadway. Mr. Chair, that is all we have. Nkongo and I are happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. I really appreciate your explanation, and also to frame it that these votes are not determining, they're more filtering. And we're going to get into a staff recommendation, but at this point, any questions?
Yeah,
Go
I
ahead.
have some
Go
comments.
ahead, Commissioner.
Thanks for the presentation. Agreed last week when it was more clearly expressed, this is what we're eliminating versus what we're selecting. That was helpful. I appreciate that you're asking residents what they and we are seeking to have evaluated. And so can we expect to see those suggestions in the next stage? So if I'm understanding correctly, we are entering this mandated environmental stage. And there's a set of criteria that perhaps is mandated in the process, but since you all and we all have asked, can residents expect to see what they've suggested being a part of the evaluation criteria? Or how is that question and the answers going to be present as the process proceeds?
Mr. Chair, Commissioner, so I think you are referring in part to this slide, which is just anything else you want us to know. These are the comments that we now pull into our design phase, and also all of these great comments on the other slides here as well. Yes, that carries forward into our design phase. We have our engineering consultants at those meetings with us. We debrief after we have those meetings. They see all these bullets as well, actually. They help us put together these slides. So the next phase will pull these suggestions into that process. As far as the prescribed federal environmental process, we have a slide in the next section that will outline some of those criteria that are further evaluated. So this was just the first, as the chair said, kind of the filtering exercise. There is another set of federally prescribed evaluation criteria that we will now undertake.
Okay, great. And so just one more comment. I just, of course, want to thank residents for offering, gifting us their feedback, and I want to make sure that they see themselves in the process. I would like to highlight a couple things on slide 17 of which I agree with, especially don't just do what's easiest, do what's best for community. Along this entire corridor, we have seen very consistent disinvestment, and I want to express my commitment to this, that we need to do what is best for community. The promises that have been made to residents, including those communities that might not see themselves on the alignment, and transit connections and trail connections and those investments. So I just want to highlight this slide 17 and appreciate the few minutes, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Other thoughts, questions?
It's like you knew I was going to have a question.
I remember not to look to my left. Council Member Chambliss.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Zeli. Yeah, I appreciate the detail and the involvement of so many people about these very important considerations. My question is, in talking with different community members and staff members, I had a question about one of the criteria that was listed in terms of transit effectiveness and access location to existing public transit, that being a criteria. For example, if residents who are to benefit from this light rail project and proposed route are near existing transit already, how does that factor into the criteria and decisions?
Mr. Chair and Councilmember Chambliss. So transit effectiveness, if I click back or click to slide 20, proximity to businesses, residents, and community assets, station accessibility, pedestrian, bike, and other transit routes. So to speak to that, so if there's existing good bus service on a route, which was one of the comments actually I just heard before the meeting again, there is good bus service there. We would seek to enhance that. Sometimes it's modified if light rail can provide a substitution for that. Sometimes it's just an addition to. We saw that both of those cases on the Central Corridor Green Line, where we removed some routes that the light rail replaced, and then we left some routes there. The other thing that's done with all these systems is a revision of the connecting bus service. So we want to bring those routes to the station areas so that we can make the whole system more effective. As far as your question on how do the other transit routes actually feed into the transit effectiveness, we are more looking at kind of, are we bringing those transit options to the businesses, to where the residents are, and accessing those community assets? It's more along those lines. If you recall the line that we proposed to eliminate, the green west I-94 option, that doesn't have great transit access. It's kind of going behind the that neighborhood there, and so that was one of the reasons that one was eliminated too. But we definitely have heard that the existing bus service is near and dear to a lot of folks, and that would be considered as we move forward.
Okay, Chair, if I might ask another question, and I think it's really great that, that one of the criteria is the redevelopment and development potential, especially in neighborhoods which have not had an opportunity and that have been disadvantaged in terms of development opportunities. So I think that's a very positive aspect to the criteria to be considered. One of the questions that was asked at one of the open houses was with regard to how we are engaging residents and displaying materials in terms of level of detail and what that design process is. I think maybe because we have that question, maybe there could be some improvements in how we explain what the design process is and when individuals, residents, and the community could expect to see more detailed designs.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Council Member, as I click back to that great graphic where and now it's stuck, where it's showing the UR here, this kind of detail is easy to consume. What this will tell everyone is public input every step of the way. It talks about at what phases we would select a preferred route, when the design is advanced, but we can expand on this type of material that's, in my mind, just really easy to follow through and can convey that out. Maybe percentage of design complete is something that folks would like to see on here as well. Sometimes that's not understandable. What does 30% design mean? What does 10% mean? But those are the kind of details we can include in here.
Okay. Chair, I'm sorry. I
Keep
thought
going,
of
that's all
one
right.
more question. And that is, the last question is with regard to assumptions that may be made about how customers get to their business sites and what our expectations of how customers will get to their business sites once we have light rail transit in place or extended through the Blue Line extension, is there an assumption made that customers will take the light rail instead of driving via car as we move forward with the design process?
Mr. Chair and council member, the assumption is that some people will take light rail, but there will still be folks who prefer to drive, to walk, to access those businesses in other ways. And that will be kind of part of what we look at. The folks stepping up and speaking right after me can probably delve in that to a little bit more. Some of the analysis we've done already and some of the analysis we will do going forward is in terms of parking and those kinds of things. So Nick and Dan can make a note to answer that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions, thoughts? Go ahead, Councilmember Ellison.
Yeah, really appreciate the presentation, and can't cover any ground any better than the two previous speakers. But I noticed the 33 responses and to the route preferences, and it just sort of 60.
Oh, this is the percent.
Okay.
It's
And so I just had a concern about the level of outreach, seeing like those responses. You know, I know that there's inevitably hundreds or thousands of people who are going to be impacted and affected, and would just love to see us, you know, and I'm down to brainstorm ways to do this, but would love to see the number of responses go up, kind of closer, you know, more into the hundreds, more into like a real sample size. I'm not a statistician or a scientist, so I don't know what a sample size sort of at what point it becomes applicable, but 33 or even 66 seems really low. It seems like it's hard to sort of extrapolate that out and say this is a trend in opinion. And so I think that the work here is really good, and I appreciate the detail and the presentation. So I'm not disparaging that at all, but just would love to see us getting more responses on the kind of things that we're going to be presenting to folks. So yeah, that was it.
Yeah, good point. Any other thoughts? Do we move on? Well, Nkongo and Chris, thank you so much. And I should also acknowledge the city staff and county staff that have been engaged in this outreach effort, and outreach will continue. To your point, this can't be just this has to be a broad understanding, and clearly that leads us to the next step. So we'll now go into the environmental analysis and the staff recommendation about project scope. We have two people who are very familiar with this project, the Hennepin County Director of Transit and Mobility, Dan Soler.
Thank you.
And the Director of Engineering and Design, Nick Landwer. So take it away.
Moving a little slow on the forward here.
Well, Chris was bouncing those slides all over.
Yeah. It's stalling out a bit. So I'm trying not to
We were bouncing around a lot there.
Yeah, I'm trying not to over push the button. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit, Chair, about the environmental analysis and the work that's going to start happening now. So, and the staff recommendation that moves forward into that analysis. So the purpose of defining the supplemental EIS scope, so we should talk about, and we talked about this last CMC meeting, that we will be publishing a notice in the Environmental Quality Board, the EQB monitor. That's a state requirement for us to do that identifies that we are going to be working on our supplemental EIS and talk about why it is needed. So it's going to include it'll talk about how the supplemental EIS will include potentially significant changes to the base route on what we're working on now. It will study the full range of environmental, social, economic impacts and compare it to what we did on the final EIS in 2016. It will also compare the multiple route options that we will have, or that we are recommending, to a no-build scenario. This will also describe the options to be studied. So Dan will follow through here a little bit on that, and then and what has changed since the final environmental impact statement. And then we anticipate that final environmental impact statement, we start working on it now, but this will be a process that's going to take us through this next year. and we anticipate that publication in the fall, winter of 2023. So a lot of work to do. So I think Chair and Commissioner Fernando, this slide we presented last time also, but it's good to ground back on what we are reviewing and looking at in that sample environmental review topic. So we're looking at community and social impacts and how visual changes from the project, the safety from the project, the community character, how that's impacted the cultural resources and things like that. We're going to be looking at transportation impacts in that also. You know, how we connect and work with transit, existing transit, and how we identify making additional connections. How we get pedestrians and bicycle and vehicles around the project to our stations and make that a clean service. Physical and environmental impacts. You know, we look at wetlands out there and the impacts to wetlands as we're going through there. We look at hazardous materials along the corridor. We look at noise and vibration and those impacts from the project. Environmental justice is also evaluated, and parks is also an evaluation that we look at in this environmental work. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Dan to talk about the scope of what we're proposing.
Thanks, thanks, Nick. Chair and members, so I know you've maybe heard this before, but I want to emphasize it again because it's a significant part. What we are recommending today is the scope of the environmental analysis that we intend to do over the next year. Eventually, we will bring back to this body a recommended scope to advance forward in construction. But that's not what we're doing today. So today, we've utilized both the route recommendation report and our outreach up to now to say this is what we are recommending the environmental process tackle as we move forward over the next year. In first, the supplemental draft environmental impact statement, and then eventually the supplemental final environmental impact statement. So I'm going to kind of walk through the corridor from north to south, starting in Brooklyn Park. So up in Brooklyn Park, light rail on West Broadway, the OMF facility, the crossing over Highway 100, the station and park and ride up around Target North Campus and the Target property, all is the same. Was cleared under the previous environmental documentation, and we intend to move forward as well. The one change there is that previously, under what would be Blue Line Extension 1.0, the intention was that the West Broadway roadway construction was going to be done kind of with separate funding from the project and therefore wasn't covered in the original environmental documentation. Now we're bringing that into the project, so the roadway portions of the West Broadway reconstruction will be covered as well. That's that second bullet there about same design, same analysis. It's just that we need to bring that into the federal environmental process because we'll be using federal funding and local funds to reconstruct that road. That's the north Brooklyn Park piece. The next piece in kind of the south end of Brooklyn Park is we will now be in the environmental study analyzing continuing the bridge over Highway 81. That was in the original environmental work. That will stay. But now LRT will be in the center of Highway 81. That'll be analyzed. And then the station changes from right adjacent to the railroad tracks to now the center of 81. So you can see the skyway there. We'd had a skyway before in the previous work that went from the parking structure over BNSF tracks to the station. Now that skyway would go over BNSF tracks and southbound 81 to the light rail station. So that becomes part of the environmental analysis. When we go onward in to the south part of Brooklyn Park and on in through Crystal. The alignment previously was on the railroad, now it's in the center of 81, so that will be covered. The station locations, both at 63rd and Bass Lake Road, are still in, but they will be no longer on the railroad, but on the center of Highway 81. And we are analyzing, in this case now, two options in the environmental analysis for the Bass Lake Road 81 intersection, an at-grade intersection design, conventional intersection with a pedestrian bridge. That will be one. And then a interchange or elevated structure where Highway 81 through lanes would go over Bass Lake Road with a diamond interchange with access to Bass Lake Road. And you can see a little bit about, a concept of what that looks like. So both of those, in terms of right-of-way impacts, traffic impacts, will be analyzed. Also in Crystal, and in support of the City of Crystal's resolution, the environmental study will look at different lane configurations and intersection configurations on the segment of Highway 81 from Highway 100 up through Bass Lake Road. Number of lanes, intersections, approaches, where the signals will be, and those traffic capacity decisions about the final piece. So those will both be covered in there, including the final station design. So that really becomes what's in the environmental study in Crystal. In Robbinsdale, again, previously, the alignment was on the railroad property all the way through Robbinsdale. Now, it would be a LRT with stations in and on Highway 81. We do not have final station locations and a final park and ride location determined in downtown Robbinsdale. Options for that will be evaluated in the environmental documents to come to a, best and both along with location and mitigation measures to go with it for where a park and ride and station in downtown will go. On the hospital end, we know that there's a desire to have a LRT station at the kind of Minneapolis, Robbinsdale, Lowry Avenue area. And so we're assuming an elevated alignment through there with an elevated station through there. That'll be covered as part of the environmental documentation as well. Impacts of building this, there's park board property there, there's roadway crossings, there's access issues both to the neighborhoods, to the hospitals. All of this will be evaluated in the environmental documentation as well. So that takes us through Robbinsdale. As we go into Minneapolis, the scope of our environmental study will have LRT on West Broadway, rather than, of course, previously we were on the railroad and we were through Golden Valley and down Highway 55. So now we will be with LRT constructed on West Broadway, and certainly on West Broadway from the Robbinsdale border down to Irving. And then as you saw earlier today, the environmental analysis will look at two options from Irving to the West Broadway, Lyndale area. And that would be LRT on West Broadway, continuing on West Broadway, and then LRT transitioning to 21st, LRT on 21st, roadway on West Broadway. We used to call those 3A and 3B, 3D. We'll now drop that, and it'll be a West Broadway option and a 21st option, and those will be evaluated with all the various environmental impacts to the Lowry area. And so you can see these are essentially the same. So here we've got LRT and roadway on West Broadway, and then the two possibilities starting at the intersection, either continuing on 21st or going down Lyndale, and then same thing here on the 21st option where we bring light rail up to 21st. Those will both be evaluated in the environmental option. So then from there to the south, we know that we're going to go to Target Field Station. That's a given. So we are going to advance in the environmental analysis two options from the Lyndale, West Broadway area down to Target Field. One essentially using Lyndale over I-94, 7th or Olson Memorial Highway into Target Field, and then an option that continues down West Broadway over I-94 to the east side of 94, and then utilizing I-94 right-of-way, possibly Washington Avenue, down 10th Avenue, and down around, right out here, around through the bus garage areas and up to Target Field. Both of them connect to 21st and West Broadway, so that's a fixed point. Both have a bridge over I-94, both and connect at Target Field, and so that's what you see here. And so these are really both going to be advanced through that process for analysis. So again, what I'm presenting here is our recommendation of what to advance forward in the environmental documentation that as we go through the next probably 12 months, what we will be analyzing, studying, looking at with both the criteria you saw earlier presented and then the other pieces that we're hearing from the public, and as Commissioner Fernando asked, how we build some of those things into our evaluation of these alternatives as well.
Right.
So, with our publication, the notice published in the environmental bulletin that will be noticed next week is our intent, and there is a 20-day comment period on that. So those comments on that, it's really to discuss the scope of what this project is going to be and the work that we're going to be doing in the environmental impact statement. We'll accept those through November 7th. And that'll be part, really associated with our scope. That doesn't mean the comments that we receive or take have ended. It just means we're continuing with the work that we're doing. Here's the address that folks will be able to send comments to, either via mail or email, to our environmental lead, Neha Damle.
Who's here?
Who's here. So hopefully she gets a lot of input, and we really do like the input and feedback that we get. And so really this now, we roll up our sleeves. The environmental next steps are we prepare and publish that supplemental draft environmental impact statement. So that's going to take us through the next few months here, where we will compare the route options and that scope that Dan just outlined for us. And then typically through that, we want to come forward and identify the preferred route option that's informed by the analysis that we're doing. Along the way, there'll be a public hearing on the draft environmental impact documents, but more chance for public engagements and comments along the way.
Great, thank you. There's a lot of considerations in this EIS. Let's open it up for comments, questions, discussions. Commissioner Fernando.
Yes, I have a question. So to make sure I'm understanding, on 39, you're accepting feedback on the notice, not the actual full thing. So I know you all have done a much better job with having it be resident facing, but there's supplemental EIS is on that slide, supplemental draft EIS is on slide 40. On slide 28, it says same as final EIS, which I think is the one from like a decade ago. But I just further encouragement to make sure we know which document is being referenced, what year that document was created, might be a way to cite it a little bit differently. And then, so that's a comment, but then I am asking a question. Is the November 7th comment period for this portion in order to do the further draft? I just want to make sure that everybody knows what we're commenting on.
Yes, so Chair, Commissioner Fernando, that is for the, as you're showing, the supplement, the notice. That is the comment period for that notice. And so the intent of that is to get back comments based on the scope that we're going forward with on the supplemental environmental impact work. We will take comments on everything. I mean, and we take them into consideration, but it's really intended for the scope to comment on that.
And so the S is, just so to clarify it, it's supplemental because there was an EIS under the last
exactly
route. This is an EIS, but it's a supplemental because we're reopening this process.
Sure. And so it's supplemental because it's supplemental to the previous documentation. And yes, part of the rules for doing either an EIS or a supplemental EIS is to submit the scope of that document to the Environmental Quality Board, the EQB. They then post it and allow for a 20-day comment period on that posting. That's official, that's open, that's that document.
Okay.
Of course, we will be spending the next year working on public meetings on, research on the drafting and the documentation of the true supplemental draft environmental impact statement. We are, of course, always willing to take comments. That will, if you go back to the next slide, that will also have at some time a public hearing back at the end of it,
And
a year
comment
from
period.
now, and a comment period. But of course, we are also going to be doing engagement on that document throughout the next year.
I understand. I think I understand. I should say. Maybe an encouragement is putting years on things. I mean, there's just a lot of acronyms, draft, supplemental, final, and to see a November 7th deadline is actually on the scope, not on the study. And so
Right.
just further encouragement to ensure that residents feel confident in being able to express their positions.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Great point. Thank you for clarifying that. November 7th isn't the end of anything. Nick?
Is it safe to say what EQB is asking is to make sure that you've got the right scope and the public could comment like, no, I want more scope or you forgot something?
Chair,
Study,
Nick,
right?
yes, that's correct.
the
I mean,
intent.
that's
The study
that's the
itself.
general
Yeah.
purpose of that, yes.
Got it. All right.
Mr. Chair, I had one other thing to add.
Please.
This was a handout in the packet today. This is the actual document that you will be commenting on. This is what EQB Monitor will be publishing. I just want to make sure everybody knew that you had that in your packet.
Ania's in the room, so you can just start any moment.
I guess I do have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, I agree with Commissioner Fernando that it gets a bit complicated with all of the processes that have been done, that will start, that we will have drafts. But I guess what we're super interested on is like, how is the ongoing efforts talking to each other, right? Because we heard from the project team they're conducting engagement. You'll be conducting engagement. Anti-displacement working group is conducting engagement. And we heard from community at times that we're confused about who's talking to us and what for and how is our information going to be used. So that's one thing, I guess. I think there needs to be more clarity in the official timelines about who's doing what and where and when, that kind of deal. And then the other thing, it's like, because it seems like the anti-displacement working group, which is great and we celebrate and is innovative, it's kind of like looking at the social impacts across the corridor, right? And it seems like y'all, through the study here, will be studying the social impacts as well. So is there a plan, or how are we planning on talking to each other about the great work that Anti-Displacement Working Group is doing and some of the work that you'll be doing as you conduct this study as well?
Chair? Ricardo, good question. And it's one of the reasons why when we considered how to kind of bring an anti-displacement working group on, that we wanted it to be essentially a part of the project team, and not a separate, though it's a separate effort in terms of the things that it's looking at, it can't be a separate effort in and of itself, because we will need recommendations from the anti-displacement working group to help inform some of the mitigation measures that we're going to do in our environmental document. As you know, being there, we talk about things like how will we deal with impacts during construction? How will we do with, potential temporary or permanent relocations? Right-of-way acquisition, impacts are all part of an environmental document as well. So they have to work partially together. And so there will be things, let me see if I can say it this way. I'm not quite sure because we haven't done this before, but I believe there will be things that are recommended by the Anti-Displacement Working Group that will then be documented as actual mitigation measures in the environmental work and need to be carried out accordingly, kind of together with the project. There will be other things that are recommended by the Anti-Displacement Working Group that may not be directly tied to the project, but they'll be implemented and carried out kind of separately. So they will work together and separately, and it kind of depends on what those pieces are.
I was going to say the same thing, so yeah.
That's always good.
All right, Riva.
Yeah, my question is regarding the impacts criteria, some of that, some of the decisions that we are making in terms of the criteria that is going to help us to determine the route. I think I'm not seeing where the anti-displacement committee is involved in helping us to assess that criteria and evaluate our process to prevent displacement, especially the historical displacement that has occurred in the past. What I've heard from that group is that we need to have them be involved in every aspect of the process, not at a point in time in the process. So if someone from the Anti-Displacement Committee can speak to what are the needs in terms of being involved on the project team and engagement, I'd appreciate that. Here.
Okay. Yeah. Any comments to that, Nick, Dan?
I'm gonna maybe let's see Terrence comment on that. I mean, I think,
Yeah, let's.
sure. I mean,
I think this is helpful comments, and thank you, C. Terrence, for joining us, that we actually had those considerations as part of our deliberations going forward.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a direct answer today, but I mean, I think certainly there is a desire from all parts of community and certainly within the context of the Anti-Displacement Working Group to become more the part of the conversation around route alignment. I don't think we've designed in structure for that to happen more intentionally so, but I think if that's the interest and sort of the direction that's desired, then I certainly can think of ways in which we can do that. But so far, we've sort of been engaging in different aspects of the project, and we haven't really been talking about, within the context of the Anti-Displacement Working Group, about the route alignment itself, at least directly.
well, and I think about it, I'm gonna just throw out four things. At grade interchange in Crystal, final station location and park and ride in Robbinsdale, 21st versus West Broadway in Minneapolis, east side of 94, west side of 94 in Minneapolis. Those are four things that will be studied on an environmental basis moving forward. What I think I'm hopefully hearing you say, council member, is how do we bring in the Anti-Displacement Working Group and Anti-Displacement Working Group values, concerns, considerations to help inform those decisions as well, including the environmental documentation.
Exactly.
We'll take that back and see how we can make that happen.
Great comment. Councilmember Littleton.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the responses and the work on this. And one of the things you were reporting on, Dan, kind of prompted this question, and it's something that's different now as we're doing the supplemental EIS work and acknowledging that through the environmental review process, that's where cultural resources get evaluated. And now what we have, based on Governor Walz's Executive Order 1924, is the Met Council was directed to, and we did adopt a tribal consultation policy. And that wasn't the case when we did the last round of environmental assessment. And so I'm not seeing that reflected in here, especially as the cultural resources are referenced. And just to note that, we're talking about displacement. There was a robust Native community in the West Broadway area. That's where my family was, and they were displaced when 94 was built, for example. But there's still remnants of that community there. As folks know, there's the Upper Midwest American Indian Center and others. And so as we're talking about displacement in this next part of our meeting, there's a perfect historic example. But really, we have an adopted government-to-government tribal relationship policy. And so where does that exist in the supplemental EIS process, please? Thanks.
Chair and Councilmember Lilligren, I'm going to ask Kelsey Young, our environmental lead, to kind of address this. It is a piece of our work now. We have the cultural resources redo, if you will, just like we have the redo on all aspects of this.
Welcome, Kelsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Yes, we're plugged in at the Met Council and governor level with the tribal coordination and relations. There will be ongoing efforts in that area, both formally under Section 106, which is our historic and cultural resources coordination. That is a federal requirement, but then also on a government-to-government basis, as you're describing, to make sure that we're engaging with tribes in a appropriate manner and re-engaging in that effort, kind of approaching things afresh. That will be part of our supplemental EIS process, certainly.
And Mr. Chair, if I may, and thank you for that, and I'll be looking for that as we go forward. And I will say it's complicated, right? There are only 2 of the 11 federally recognized tribes in our state that share geography with the metro, and so that's sort of one thing to look at. But really, as we've acknowledged as we developed the policy at the Met Council, is that we have dozens of tribes, hundreds of tribes represented in our population, and in this specific geography, there's just a lot of history through the relocation process and things. So we are trying to figure out as Met Council, as you know, how this applies here. And so I think this is a huge and great example and opportunity to make sure that we are enforcing our own policies in the most robust way possible. Thanks.
And as you point out, this is an opportunity to shift this new practice, which we're developing those muscles to do.
And Chair, Council Member, that's a great example of, we've talked a lot today about how we're doing things in the supplemental environmental impact statement because of a change in location and route. But of course, through the years, other requirements and rules and background stuff on environmental work itself has changed. And of course, any new work we do will need to follow and be part of those guidelines. And thankfully, Kelsey and her team are well up to speed on what all of those pieces mean as we tackle this on the new piece.
Commissioner Lundy, you had a comment.
Yeah, just a couple. One is, thank you for adding the kind of the anti-displacement as part of the process. And also, I think laying it out there is going to be stuff inside the project and outside the project. And I just want to say out loud that outside the project means money. And that doesn't mean it's part of this, but to talk about anti-displacement, not talk about, the needs for investment, whether it's availability for low interest, whether it's to protect city or county or whatever entity owned land so that it can be actually directed toward a community good, will require old-fashioned cash. And I know that's not part of the project. I know that, I've worked Commissioner Fernando, Councilmember Ellis, and many others to start talking about that conversation that we all know. Mayor, we did a walking tour up there to take a look at. So I think everybody's interested in that. We all know there needs to be a concerted effort. That won't be part of the project, but I definitely see the anti-displacement teams as part of guiding that work to make sure that we're providing an investment mechanism so that it'll carry out what the anti-displacement teams put forward. And the other part is, I think, a question, Dan, I think I've received for some cities is just the idea that if there's something that they would like to do that may not be that official kind of way of doing environmental studies, but something that the community wants to just see. Like, I know we've done demonstrations where we've had people ride stuff. I know Robin Sales talked about the whistles and things like that, that I don't know if it's part of the EIS, but I think it kind of, in my head, seems like it, but it may not be something we actually document. But I just wanted to say that here, that there may be opportunities at multiple places where somebody's like, I'd really like to get an idea of what this looks like.
We're certainly, thanks, Chair, Commissioner, we're certainly open to, helping use some of the existing system that we have, putting that in place. I think the baby's thinking I'm talking too much. And not unusual. And to help do that, and also just to help staff and policymakers from any of our jurisdictions help understand, what are we looking at? What does it mean? How can we be informative? We'll be there to help do that as we go.
Yep. And last thing I'll just say is just that I do think that bus tour that we did, where we brought people down the line, we did some stops and we let people get out and see things like that, it's really impactful and should be a mechanism we don't just put aside and say we've done it once, because there may be community leaders, especially on these different routes, that want to kind of get an idea of what that looks like. I think it's really highly effective for people to visualize by actually seeing and stopping.
Particularly during this process.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks. Any other thoughts? No, great discussion, some good ideas to incorporate. And Dan, Nick, thank you.
Chair.
Yeah. All right, so we right on time. We have Terrence Anderson and Cathy Gold. Cathy Gold from Hennepin and C. Terrence from Kura. We're going to talk about the anti-displacement engagement and working group process. And since we've already started the conversation, welcome.
Good to be here. It's good to see all of you. Sorry Lee's not here. I heard Lee was a big hit last time, but we'll get to hear it next time. It's really good here to talk about our anti-displacement work. Of course, we're, I don't know, 3/4 of a year through this project. And of course, a lot has been going on. And we recently had our second full Saturday meeting a couple weeks ago. And so kind of just coming here today to sort of give you an update about where we're at with our anti-displacement work. Hopefully y'all feel comfortable enough for me to sort of just move from the place of our second meeting and going from there. I sort of just want to sort of remind just a little bit about what we did in our first meeting. So our first meeting was about learning from what we know about anti-displacement or about displacement and what occurred with the existing green and blue lines, right? And we sort of left that meeting with the sense of when did displacement occur, what types of displacement occurred. But then we also sort of talked about what are 27 different policies in which we could sort of employ or implement in order to prevent those different types of displacement. And so sometimes I like to say, we really left the first meeting where probably a lot of processes like this might have ended, which is, here's 27 ideas, figure it out, right? But I think there's a lot more to sort of figure out between those things in order to understand what are the right things to implement along this process. And I think probably more of the theorization about what we need to do in this anti-displacement work is actually more about organizing different entities, different governments and community to sort of have the same analysis, the same language, shared power and shared outcomes ultimately on what folks will see is the impact of what we want, which is that folks aren't displaced and that the blue line benefits the folks who currently live along this corridor, of course. And so we left the first meeting with those 27 different policies, and sort of what I like to say is like, that's the 10,000 foot, right? There's 27 different options. Each of those options have a lot of different varieties or different individual manifestations that could look differently. And so we need to sort of find the right manifestation about those things. And ultimately, we're trying to go from 10,000 feet to about 500 feet from the ground, right? And I say 500 feet, we're not trying to implement these policies, right? This isn't the same thing as an actual policy-making process that would go through governments, but we're trying to queue up enough information that would sort of point towards the implementation, as well as build the structure that would implement that transparently and accountably with community as well. And so I just want to sort of remind in that context where we're operating. We had our September 24th workshop, which some of the folks were here, were part of it. Hopefully they feel good about the work that happened there. We started with those 27 different policies, and our work between June 4th and September 24th was about deepening our understanding, particularly where governments are around those 27 different policies. So we surveyed each of the local governments as well as Hennepin County, the Met Council. Here's 27 different things. What do you think about them? Are they things that you're already doing? Are they things that you think, well, we could do this in sort of a leadership role or a resourcing role? Or these are things we feel challenged or sort of resistance around, which can mean a variety of different things, right? It could be jurisdictional, could be resource, could be staff expertise, could be cost, right? We just sort of broke down amongst them around these 27 different policies, and which I think was actually quite amazing to sort of see where each government is at. And within the meeting, we asked the community, okay, which of these things are important to you? And so out of that conversation, which sounds like it was a short conversation, but it was
Quite long.
6 hours maybe of the 8 hours that we had in the meeting. And what I like to say, we landscape those 27 different policies. Where does sort of government fall? Where does community fall? Where do we already see things where there's alignment? And I think out of the 27 different policies, about 14 of them, community and governments were like, yeah, we're already doing this, or we could do this, right? So 14 out of the 27, which you might say, hey, the win is right there, right, in this work. But I still think there's a lot more to do, and I'll sort of talk about that in a second too. But we got a good landscape around those 27 different policies. The other piece that we focused on was developing a structure for the recommendations themselves. And so I'm thinking about this group, and I'm thinking about the different governments. Once we make those recommendations, what are the things that you want to see within those recommendations? Like, what makes you take it up and say, okay, yes, this is the right thing at the 500 square foot. Like, it's not going to be the same thing as implementing it, but hopefully you see enough detail about it that you can sort of see the intention and the impact that we're hoping to have about the work. And I think the other part of it is thinking about what does transparency and accountability look like once it leaves the anti-displacement working group table, right? So I think it's not enough just to sort of make a recommendation and then sort of community disappears. I think it's quite the contrary. Community has an expectation that they sort of continue from 500 feet to the ground. Hopefully, I'm going to try to limit the use of that metaphor too much, but that's sort of the hope, right? How do we sort of see beyond this table into the next several years of delivering this work? Of course, we're thinking pre-construction, during construction, and after construction. So we're talking about quite a long period of time. And so we're trying to develop the structures and sort of recommend a structure that hopefully holds all those things, community, government, and philanthropy sort of sitting together to implement these very important things. So yeah, 8 hours of pouring through all of that. I'm sort of giving the high level conversation about it, but there was, I think, a really, really robust conversation around it. Some of the things that we think we're going to do, we need to affirm this with the anti-displacement working group itself, but we sort of have already bucketed what we heard from that conversation about those 27 different policies in 4 ways. There's existing policies, so these are things that governments are already doing and sort of already offering up to address displacement. There's sort of the likely policies that government's already like, yeah, we think this is probably a pretty good thing for us to do. We need to just sort of figure it out, but there's really no reason that we can see from our vantage point right now about why we couldn't do them, either from a leadership or a resourcing role. There's policies with resistance, right? So things that governments sort of say, we've got some challenges to deliver these things for various reasons, as I sort of stated before. But community is still saying, these are really important though, right? So I think you really need to think more about these things. We need to sort of solve the puzzle about these policies. And then what I call new policies, I just mean they're not part of that original 27, and so we didn't sort of landscape them with particularly governments and philanthropy beforehand. And so they just sort of we sort of need to like introduce them into the conversation. So I think maybe we're at 32 policies at the end of leaving the Saturday meeting. And so there's 4 different pathways really around each of those policies. Sort of the ones that existing, Cathy, I think you actually came up with this, making them blue. So sort of the idea that they may exist, but they probably are not intended or have the impact that we would need in order to address displacement along the blue line extension. So say, for example, there may be a land disposition policy that each government has, but the land disposition policy is covering such a broader area, broader sort of idea that may not be specifically cognizant of what displacement that might come out of the blue line extension being constructed or coming into existence and operating. And or there may be sort of commercial property development funds that some governments have, but those are for, say in the city of Minneapolis, is for the whole city of Minneapolis, right? And if you sort of map the geography of it, it would be spread throughout the city. And if you sort of kept the funding level at the current way that it is, it probably wouldn't be enough to address what's going to happen specifically in this corridor. And so we need to assess those existing policies about what do we need to change or target about them in order for them to be effective in the way that the anti-displacement working group is thinking of in the context of the blue line extension. And then for the other 3, it's, okay, they don't sort of exist, but there's sort of varying levels of understanding about what you could or couldn't do about them. We sort of need to do a feasibility analysis of them. So what's the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the impact that we intend to have? What's the cost? Who's the right person in the right role, right? So some folks are leading or implementing it. Some people are resourcing it, right? Various roles amongst community and government about them. And so we need to just sort of understand those things. So within all those, right, we want to consider the problem, we want to match it to the impact, we want to do a cost analysis, and we want to sort of think about the strategy for implementation along the way. And, you know, there's 32 different things. We probably can prioritize among them because some policies do the same thing just in a slightly different way, like what's the right value capture mechanism to sort of focus on. And so we'll sort of work through that basically for the rest of our time when we're in the group, right? So there's a lot to really talk about in these policies, but I think if you sort of had like a short tagline, the win is right there, right? There's 14 things already that governments and community pretty much see very similarly on, and we sort of just need to point sort of this process to sort of make sure that those things can be delivered and making sure that you can sort of understand how they can be delivered most effectively. Jumping to the next slide. So what do we want to sort of think about when we deliver it at the end of the day? So I want to sort of think about if you're picking up our recommendation in a meeting like this and what you're reading about the recommendations, this is sort of what we want to sort of point to and speak about. or thinking that we can speak about. So the policies themselves, right, so explicitly naming them, but it's also about the roles that each government might have on them. I think Kim's here, Kim Bergen's here. She had a great sort of idea, or she was presenting about the work that Brooklyn Park was doing. I think it was about sort of building a community-centered commercial space. And in building that community-centered commercial space, there's sort of a role for the city, for the county, for the Met Council, and sort of the end community as well too, right? So there's different roles that might deliver individual policies. And so we want to be cognizant about that, which I think is important because sometimes the conversation that doesn't happen is, oh, I don't do this, so that's the end of the conversation. It's like, well, I could do this, right? Maybe I'm the resourcer, and if you don't have that, and we can sort of figure that out. We want to talk about cost, and I think sort of generally, the group is very aspirational. There's a lot of, I'm very inspired by this group. This group is thinking of a high dollar of ultimately what we're going to need, and I think that's beautiful, and I think it's great, and I think it's practical and possible as well too. So as much as we can sort of point towards those intentions and possibilities that sort of can be made sense of in a very real way is where we're sort of pointing towards in this as well. We want to talk about impact and the measurement for success. So if we deliver a particular policy, what is the impact that we expect, and how might you measure it along the way in its delivery? We want to talk about legal considerations. Some things might have state preemption. Some things, right, might need to change sort of. I'm not a lawyer, so you're gonna have to talk to the lawyers particularly about those things. We have one on the project, so she'll be talking a lot about that aspect of it. The timing, is this something to be done before, during, or after construction? Different examples both around the country about how they've been implemented, but as well as examples of their need that we're hearing within our qualitative and quantitative research, and as well as sort of the implementation strategy or plan that might be helpful for y'all to think about. So I think if you see that slide and like there's still a question, like let me know, because perhaps that's the thing that we really need to focus on more in our research. Ultimately, you know, I want to think about not just about submitting ideas for recommendation, but as I said, sort of what might be the structure for implementing them. And I sort of put it in this sort of metaphor. Community knows that there's an intention to deliver the Blue Line extension because there's a structure to deliver it, right? We're meeting in this room, right? There's engineers working on it and all these different sort of things. I think similarly, we have to think about what is the structure that communicates and intends and has the resourcing to deliver these anti-displacement policies too, right? And so we're starting to think about that because frankly, I think folks in the room need to understand that aspect in more detail for them to continue to show up powerfully, expending all the energy that they do with the belief that it's not gonna be wasted at the end of the day as well too. And so we're thinking about that in the long term. And so this is a body that's delivering the recommendation. We need to think about what are the different bodies that need to receive these recommendations, and how do we prepare those bodies to receive those recommendations too, right? Is there sort of an internal working group or another working group that's constructed of community and staff, maybe similar to our internal working groups, that sort of receive these recommendations and bring them from 500 feet down to the ground and deliver those sort of final details. But it's also still the necessity of global convening, right? This is, displacement is a regional problem, right? And it can't be solved in individual units of government, right? And so I think it's continuing to think about a regional convening aspect of this. If anything, what we're trying to deliver in this process is sort of breaking down the silos that might have tended to exist around these different issues and making sure that they're sort of solved in the same way they're solved in other aspects of this project as well too. And so thinking about that, right, phase two, if we're in phase one right now, I think it's a good time to start thinking about phase two. We're gonna deliver policy recommendations. We're gonna start talking about those dollars, but there's gonna need to be somebody who sort of brings it to dollars to deliver, sort of understanding the resource possibilities, drafting a more specific plan that's sort of cognizant of operating across different jurisdictions as well as philanthropy and community, and sort of having a management structure to deliver it all. So I know this might seem like the cart before the horse in a sense of, right, we don't have the recommendations yet, but actually we're not too far away, right? Where this project is projected to end in February. And so if you're keying up these structures, like probably right now is the right time to think about those things. And so we're gonna continue to affirm these structures with the Anti-Displacement Working Group to make sure we have the right values, as well as sort of thinking about the right structures that sort of make sense, especially in the context of community, as well as philanthropy, to make sure that this all sort of folds in and connects in well, and there isn't sort of a hiccup between recommendation and getting at the end of the day. So I don't know. I think that was a lot. The next steps, we're gonna have another meeting. Our next full Saturday meeting looks like it's gonna be in December. We'll have an in-between meeting to sort of affirm these things with the anti-displacement working group, as well as kind of filling in. This is sort of a skeleton. We need to sort of strategize with them about the right ways to move from here. So that's what's coming up very soon.
Yeah, looking forward to that back and forth conversation between the work group members and then our internal government representatives so that we can start to understand, are we in the right place here? If not, where are the gaps? Where do we need to work at to get to that place where community is feeling like they're being heard? And, a pathway forward for government to get these things actionable.
See, Terrence, Cathy, thank you. This is suddenly feeling very real.
Good.
And I can understand why it takes a bunch of 8-hour days, because
Right.
you're going in very deeply. And I think that this is the right table to be considering and thinking about it. But as you've alluded, and I think Commissioner Lundy, you actually said, there's some that are in this project. There's a lot that's right adjacent to the project, just outside. So we've got to kind of understand how we make it all actionable and implemented. So that's our challenge that we're going to be there with you to do. Yeah. Any thoughts, questions, feedback at this point?
Mr. Chair? Yeah, this is more comments. I thought I had a question here, but I haven't quite been able to frame it as one. But first off, I really want to commend you for this work, and especially for the sort of approach of abundance that you're taking to the cost conversation. And that's something that we don't always hear in these kinds of conversations. So yay, thank you. And then the other is, and this is kind of, cutting edge, groundbreaking, kind of new way of doing this, but it's not unlike other things we've done in the region on projects, the Green Line and the kind of the community engagement and investment, and it wasn't maybe specifically anti-displacement, but what I'm really excited to see as you get into the roles and part of your recommendation is how the local communities, especially the municipalities along the line, can organize their resources. They can define specific geographies to target with certain tools. To your comment about how a lot of the city's tools are dispersed throughout the entire city, but they can be made very specific through action. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that part come forward in a really well-developed way that the local communities can take and put in place to implement. Thank you.
Go ahead, the council member.
Yeah, also just have a comment, not so much a question. It's been really great to follow the work and to participate in some of the community activities and community outreach that you guys have done. Really grateful for that. And then, kind of to comments before from Councilmember Lilligren, Commissioner Lundy, the resource question I think is a really important question. And honestly, the fact that anti-displacement has been this big and this vocal a part of every single project, I mean, this should be a model for how we talk about displacement and anti-displacement moving forward. There's like the example in other cities when it comes to populations not having a place to live within their city. I was reading a book not too long ago that talks about when Pruitt-Igoe was destroyed in St. Louis, and you get people don't go away, right? They go somewhere. Right, they go to Ferguson. They go to these other places where their needs still aren't met. And so often when we talk about these projects, we talk about displacement as sort of this inevitability. Well, you build some infrastructure and some populations are just going to go away, but they're not going to go away. They're going to go into the Brooklyns. They're going to go to New Hope. They're going to go somewhere. They might go to the street. And then we're dealing with folks and continuing to try to address homelessness. And so I think that I'm glad that we have so many leaders who have focused on anti-displacement, and Commissioner Fernando has been a big advocate in making sure that this is front and center on this project. And so thank you for that advocacy. Thank you all for the work, and I just look forward to making these real, having those conversations about resource possibilities and figuring out the policies are good. Let's get those in place. And where's the money coming from, and where's it going? I think that's incredibly important. So thank you.
I just want to put a plug in too for our October public events. C. Terrence and Kira team will be there. reporting out at our second workshop that we went through, and hopefully engaging a lot of folks and understanding of what we talked about and where we're at and where we're going.
Great meeting today, folks. Thank you all. Just a heads up, the next CMC meeting is November 13th, so stay tuned. Work continues. Thank you all for your efforts, your commitment, and just as a reminder, there is a convening meeting, something happening in this room, chambers, at 3 o'clock, so we've got 3 minutes. So class dismissed, and this meeting's adjourned, and